Welcome to the DLN channel. Thank you for joining us today as we fly through African American history with the Tuskegee Airmen. I'm Karen Ricks, your host, and today we are honored and privileged to be in the presence of documented original Tuskegee Airmen. We have Chief Master Sergeant Grant Williams Sr. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
And we would like to also welcome our virtual audience that's connected live with us today. We have Meek Elementary School. Welcome, Meek Elementary.
Go ahead, Kim.
Welcome. And we would like to extend that invitation to the students who are using Meek Elementary, Meek High School's unit. So welcome students out at Meek High School.
Hey, welcome.
Welcome. And thanks to all that are joining us via video conference on our DLN channel. And you can interact live with our original Tuskegee Airmen by sending your questions into dlinfochannel@gmail.com. All right, we have students all around the world, actually, that are studying history. And sometimes they're coming across the term Tuskegee. Can you tell us, who are the Tuskegee Airmen?
The Tuskegee Airmen, a group of men, black men, who were the first combat pilots for America.
All right, and okay, our second question on the list is, how did you become involved with the Tuskegee?
Oddly enough, I wasn't a volunteer. I came in through the draft and was sent to Tuskegee for basic training and then assigned to a unit that was designed to support the flying element.
Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, which leads us to our third question is, what was your role, your actual role, when you were with the Tuskegee group?
After completion of my basic training, I started training to become a clerk, and I served in that capacity and advanced to a little bit higher calling, and later became first sergeant of the squadron. And eventually I became group sergeant major, which was the senior enlisted man in the group of squadrons who supported the flying element.
Okay, now is that the 332nd Squadron in specific, or?
No, that was not in the fighter program unit, but it was in a support squadron. It was called the headquarters squadron of the Tidewater, I'm sorry, not Tidewater, headquarters squadron of the 96th Air Service Group,
okay,
which was designed to do everything necessary for the flying units to do their job.
Okay, now did you ever want to be a pilot?
I can't say that I did.
Okay.
I had some experience with a civilian pilot training.
Okay.
But I didn't think about becoming a pilot.
Okay.
And I found out once I arrived at Tuskegee, and I saw what was going on, I still didn't fancy the idea of becoming a pilot myself, but I had no qualms about doing what I could to keep the flying men in the air.
Okay, great. All right, moving on to our fifth question is, some of the viewers may not want to be a pilot also, and they think that Tuskegee is only for pilots. What other careers does Tuskegee support?
The organization in which I was assigned had people who were trained to do everything that was necessary to keep the pilots in the air. Now, in the group program, We had weather people. We had cooks. We had people to repair everything that could get broken. Mm-hmm. Everything to run an organization. So we had people designed for all of the support portion of the organization.
Okay, that's good information to know, so students can exercise choice and to still include Tuskegee as one of those opportunities, because it's not just for pilots, it's for support of a lot of different careers. All right. When the Defense Department launched the program to train the first black military pilots in air crews, what was your initial reaction?
Actually, I wasn't in on that portion of it.
Okay.
My knowledge of the organization only came after the initial people had been assigned to the organization. They trained at a distance from Tuskegee. Okay. The program didn't start at Tuskegee, actually.
Oh, okay.
The first people to be trained for the duty at Tuskegee trained at Chanute Field, Illinois, and those men went through the various classes that prepared them to do all of these things. For example, we had people studying weather, so we had some weather forecasters, we had truck drivers, we had mechanics, and everything that was necessary. So once that first element was trained at Chanute Field, the airfield at Tuskegee was being prepared. And when just about the time when it was ready, they sent those men down to Alabama. The airfield wasn't ready at that time, so they stopped at another air base until the airfield at Tuskegee was completed and ready to accept some 300 or more enlisted men and officers to do the work at Tuskegee.
Okay, and this is the Moton Field.
No, that wasn't Moton Field. Moton Field was an adjunct to the Tuskegee Army Airfield. I saw something recently where it gave that impression that was the Tuskegee Army Airfield. But that was adjacent to where the main flying was done. But they did, the men who trained at Tuskegee Institute, they did their flying training at Moton Field.
Okay.
But when the main element was at Tuskegee, it was at a different field rather than Moton Field.
The field that was adjacent to Moton Field.
Sure.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, because that's good information to have. Did you support any planes, administratively, did you support any planes as they were going through their involvement in the war?
Well, we didn't come in connection with very much in the airplane work. We had people in our organization who were trained specifically for certain tasks.
Okay.
And so whatever work had to be done on the airplane, for example, our organization was designed to support and do all repairs on the aircraft up to something that had to go back to the depot. And the people that we had, as I said, had various jobs. Weather people, for example. We had the truck drivers, ordnance people who had to prepare their ammunition and things of that sort. So we had specialists in each area.
Okay. All right. Now, there's a lot of talk when you're discussing World War II, and they're talking about the Tuskegee Airmen. There's a lot of talk and about the P-51. What was the P-51?
P-51 was one of the best, or was the best airplane that was, when the organization first started, we didn't have the P-51. Our initial airplanes were some worn-out airplanes that were used back in Claire Chennault days. That's in fighting the war in China. And they were hand-me-downs, so to speak. The first decent plane they got was a P-40, and they used that until the first squadron went overseas. They were using the P-40. When the 332nd, which was 4 additional squadrons, when that was activated, they got a newer airplane, which was the P-39, the Aracoba. They flew the Aracoba then until the 4 squadrons joined upon arrival in Italy. And that was a pretty good airplane. But for a short while, they got another airplane that we hear little talk about, because it was used for such a short period of time. They got the P-47. And eventually, they got the best airplane that we had, which was the P-51. And that's where while the P-47 did something that no other airplane did during World War II, those guys sank a destroyer with machine gun fire only, for example.
Oh, wow.
And that was the claim to fame for that airplane.
Okay, so the science behind the P-51 that kind of set it apart from the other aircraft is that it had an increased range.
That's right.
Which allowed them to go further into the enemy territory.
It actually had the capacity to put on additional wing tanks. So, and they did have some missions that where those wing tanks came in very handy.
Okay. Now, students and educators, they may be curious to know what that P in P-51 stands for.
It actually stands for pursuit.
Okay.
That's a pursuit plane. They later changed the designation, and they became fighters.
Okay. So did they use an F for fighters, or just a P?
They still call it the P-51, but they just changed the usage, yes.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing for students to think about, is that each plane had a different role too.
That's right.
Okay, so this pursuit plane.
The Tuskegee Airmen at this point was using all fighter planes. Now see, they did use a different plane. They had some bombers. A bomber unit was developed, but that came much later in the program.
Okay, so the P-51 did more support for the other bombing planes?
Well, they did a better job.
Okay.
That's the thing. They had a longer range, and as I said, in using the additional wing tanks, they were able to make some extremely long flights.
Okay, and with them being able to go further into enemy territory, they really saved a lot of the bombing planes from being what they called sitting ducks.
That's right.
And being exposed to enemy fire.
Certainly.
All right. So you're going a little bit into it. How exactly did the P-51 make a notable contribution to the success of the Tuskegee Airmen?
Well, for one thing, and that was one mission, for example, that was extremely important. Some of you may have heard of the great train robbery. They talk about our supply people used some tactics that's a little bit unusual. But on the longest mission that was performed in World War II was a 1,600-mile round trip to Berlin. Oddly enough, that particular mission wasn't planned for the Tuskegee Airmen, but because of the fact that at that time they didn't have the mileage range that would take them to the target and back. But our supply people, using some ingenuity, heard that there was a train down between Barry, which was down at the port where the airplanes would come in, and where they were stationed. They heard that there were some wing tanks on a train, and they sent our supply people down and talked the engineer into allowing them to remove those tanks. And they worked all night to get them put on the airplane. And for the next morning, when they took off for this long flight, where they expected to have additional airplanes to meet them and take over to complete the mission. For some reason or other, the guys didn't show up. They had problems with weather, and our men were able, because they had intercepted a train with the larger wing tanks on them. They worked all night, got them ready for the next day, and they were able to complete that mission. There's an interesting story along with that particular mission. With the fact that the relief didn't show up, and they were able to complete the mission, they saved the system, because otherwise they would have been lost. They wouldn't have been able to complete the flight. And they also, on that particular mission, did something that was very odd. While we didn't have any aircraft with jet engines, they encountered some jets, and they were able to defend themselves, and they shot down 3 jets on that particular mission. So that's one of the nice things that happened as a result of their ingenuity.
Oh, that's remarkable. And yeah, the science behind that they were seeing is that the P-51 had a little bit better maneuverability.
That's right.
Whereas the jets couldn't turn as fast.
That's
and
right.
So that made them capable of being shot down by the P-51 airmen. Wow. Okay, and we're going to move to the next question, okay? And this is going to get a little bit, I want to know how you feel about this, because fighting for your country is honorable, but not always glamorous. A slogan used many times during war. Now, this may have definitely been relevant as you fought against fascism abroad and racism here at home. What made you persevere?
Well, we had a leader, and I give him credit for instilling in his men the importance of success. He explained to his men the job that they had to do, and he had had a rough time in becoming a pilot, for example. Mm-hmm. He had spent 4 years at West Point, being the only black man there. He had to suffer some things that no human being should be required to do. He had to take his meals separately because no one would sit down with him. And when I said that was just one situation. During the week, he had his meals with his classmates. But on weekends, he had to stop at each table and ask for permission to be seated. He was consistently refused. He was the only black man at West Point. And he was determined to succeed. So he talked to his men and let them know what they were up against. And they took him at his word. So these men felt like supporting him, and they did everything they could to support him, and they did. So as a result of that, the idea, this is the first opportunity that people of color had an opportunity to fly airplanes and to have the opportunity to succeed at all costs. He says, we must win. And as a result of that, these men took him at his word, and they made a record that no other unit before or since has been able to accomplish. And we feel that his attitude caused them, or caused us, to do the best job that we could do. And I think we did a pretty good job.
Yes, you did. You did an excellent job, and this is why we're honoring you today, and we feel very privileged to be with you. All right, so, okay, so despite of the repeated message that you as a race couldn't do it and were incapable, how did you remain focused and determined?
We knew that in wartime, if you didn't do it if you didn't get hurt one way, if you didn't protect yourself the best you could, you couldn't succeed. So we did everything we could to support the cause, and as we learned a little bit at the time that we were accomplishing something, that made us feel better, and our guys just decided that we're in this war and we're going to win it.
All right. And, okay, so you're saying that you felt accomplishments toward eradicating racism at home?
Well, at home, we didn't know how things were going at home, but we'd hoped that things were going to be better. It didn't happen that fast. Right. However, I feel that the job that we did overseas had a lot to do with where we stand today. It's if we hadn't accomplished something out of the ordinary, I think we would have been at the same place where we started out. But I think that the accomplishment of this organization had a lot to do with the status that we have today.
Okay, and I know that the change was slow, like you were saying, to notice the change at home. Did it seem faster when you were abroad?
No, because when we came home, we found the same thing. For example, when we went overseas, the ship that I was on left from Newport News, Virginia. And when I came back into Newport News. We went out, we had different gates, one for white, one for colored. We were called colored people back in those days. When the war was over, we found the same thing. No change. And it took a long time before any change could be seen. Eventually, America decided to make a change. And of course now we live in a different world.
We would like to know that and appreciate that your contributions helped to spur those changes.
That's right.
Yes, yes. All right, so kids are now learning and some relearning about the Tuskegee Airmen, and many will go see the movie Red Tails, which is actually playing in theaters now.
Yes.
What do you want them to consider or know specifically about Tuskegee when they're watching this movie?
I want them to realize and compare where we stand today as opposed to what it was back in the 1940s. And if you're earnest, honest, you'll see that there's a world of difference. We are able now to be anything that we want to be if we put our mind to it. Who would have thought that the time would come to have a black president? So once that happens, then the sky's the limit.
That's a good motto for the students out there to know that, you know, the sky is the limit. You set your goal, your destination, and you can achieve whatever your heart's desire. It's a good motto to live by. All right, and now after the students have watched the Red Tails movie, what message would you hope they gain from the movie?
I think the message that we want them to realize is that we made a comment about it, that the world is open. And if you strive to do the best that you can, that's all that we can hope for. But experience has taught us that if we try hard enough, we can succeed. And we can change the attitude of those non-believers. And it'll make it a better place for all of us.
Okay, so students, you hear it here from an original Tuskegee Airman that you persevere, you set your goals high, and you can achieve whatever you set as your destination. I'd like to take a moment to have some of the students ask you some questions, if you don't mind.
All right.
And remind our viewing audience that if you want to interact with Chief Master Sergeant Quinton Williams, Sr., you can email those questions into dlinfochannel@gmail.com. So I would like to first start off with Meek Elementary School and give those students a moment to ask questions. Meek Elementary.
Want to ask the one you wanted to? Yeah.
Ask the question. Talk to the camera.
Go ahead. How many bombers did you help?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
How many bombers did you help?
How many bombers do you think the Tuskegee Airmen held?
I don't know how many, unless you're talking about how many bombers we had. Are you talking about individuals or airplanes?
Bombers. But individuals.
Individuals.
Individuals. Okay. We had right at 1,000 pilots. Now, we didn't, during World War II, we didn't use bombers. Now, that's a later portion of the program when we did have some bombers trained. but they didn't fly in World War II. They flew in later on in Korea and in Vietnam. But we had fighter planes in World War II, and we had right at 1,000 pilots, and for each pilot, it takes 10 or more support people on the ground. So I've seen figures as high as 19,000 altogether who fought in World War II. Does that answer your question?
Sir?
Speak up. Speak up.
Yes, sir.
All right, well, we'll take another question from Meek Elementary.
Come on, Ken. There's a microphone right there. They're a little shy.
Okay, it's okay.
They don't have. Go ahead.
Did you lose any battles or wars?
Okay, did you lose any battles or any wars?
Well, we lost some and we won some. We won the most, though. We came home safe.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, and one more question from Meek Elementary before we ask some students from the Meek High School to share their questions.
They shied up on us. They don't want to ask any questions right now.
All right. Okay, well, let's let Meek High School students have an opportunity to ask questions. So Meek Elementary, if I can get you to mute again. And Meek High School students, you have any questions?
Meek Elementary is using Meek High School's equipment. That's why we're showing up on there twice.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to go to the email for those that are watching virtually to see if there are any email questions that have come in. All right, and we do have a question from, this school is in Missouri, and the question is, how often and how long was the training program at Tuskegee?
I can't give you a specific time. If I recall, the training program for the fighter pilots was something like 13 months. Something in that area.
Okay, so about a year of training.
About a year of training, right.
Okay, and do you have another question that has come in from the email? And this question is from Shelton, out from Virginia Beach. And this question is, what were they fighting for during World War II? So this student may be in a history class and is asking, what were they fighting for during World War II? Do we know the background?
World War II was fought basically to make the world a little bit better, a place to live. Now, there's a lot of things involved in that question. I'm just trying to figure out what specifically you're driving at. The one thing I believe that our people, and I'm talking about America in general, I'm not talking about color, I'm talking about everybody, we wanted to make America a better place to live. And we wanted to make America so that the world would recognize it as being progressive rather than standing still. That's about as close as I can come. I know you're not asking for specifics, but you might be asking for specifics, but I can't give you the specifics.
Okay, and they might be they might have read in their textbooks about going to Berlin, going to Germany, and fighting against Nazism and Hitler, and in regard to that, and ending fascism, which is that that dictatorship that practiced on supremacy, believing that one group of people were supreme or better than another group of people, and eliminating people in that respect. And so America went over there to help to end that all.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that would be pretty much a general overview of World War II. And so as African Americans took their part in it, it became, I would think, a personal fight, because you saw that we were dealing with our own issues with the racism over here, and that would give us more an incentive to help other countries as well as help ourselves.
Absolutely, and that was that portion, as being separate even from the other part, America wanted to set a pattern that was a little different from what we had. And of course, the results in it, in a difference.
Okay. One of the things that the students may not know is that the Tuskegee Airmen, we're talking about the Tidewater chapter because we're in Virginia, we're in Hampton, Virginia, and but they're Tuskegee Airmen all across the United States, and they're different chapters.
That's right. Mm-hmm. We have, I believe, 54 or 55 chapters throughout the states with the Tuskegee Airmen program. And for the young people, we do have an aviation program for them. We have chapters with youngsters in there. We had a 15-year-old girl who flew from California to Newport News and back. That she's not eligible for a automobile driver's license, but she had a seasoned pilot with her, and we have this program that we try to encourage the kids to learn to fly at an early age. And America wants to make America a better place to live. And I think if our students will put their mind to it, and you can go a long ways in helping the world a better place.
All right. And I want to open it back up before I take any more email questions in. Remember, if you are participating through the DL Info channel and you'd like to ask a question to Chief Master Sergeant Grant Williams, Sr., you can do so by emailing dlinfochannel at gmail.com. Meek Elementary, I know you have some anxiety over there in Alabama. Do you have any last questions? Going to give you another opportunity to ask a question. See some hands up there.
Go ahead, Ed.
How was it to be in World War II?
Speak up.
How was it being in
World War II. World War II.
How was it being in World War II?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so how was it?
It's scary.
Living through World War II.
It was scary. You know, as a soldier, or what we would call an airman, we were in danger all the time. We had to be careful how you walked and where you walked. There were people over in other areas waiting to shoot you if they saw you. So it was a little bit tough, scary. And I know you as youngsters don't want to get into anything like that. So you, as you grow up, you want to learn all you can and help to make America a better place to live.
Okay, so you have to be brave.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it's a scary situation being in another country, you know, being at odds or at war. So it was a scary situation, right? And another question from me?
Yes.
What did you eat?
Okay, so what did you eat? What type of food did they have for you when you were, you know, involved in the war?
Well, we had American food for the most part. I can tell you, though, that I was introduced through an Italian family of a dish that I had never had before, and that was, I had some, well, let's see, how can I put it? I had some live, not live, it was dead, but I had some food that I hadn't tested before in America, and that was a rabbit that was tame. And that, to think about it as a child, it was scary. But I found they had a different name for it, and it tasted, wound up being pretty good. So we did learn to try some things that we hadn't been exposed to before.
Okay. And that's good advice for the students out there to try some vegetables.
Right.
You know, try different things, okay? I have a question that came in from the email, and this is from Belinda out at Richmond. And she says, well, how long were you in Italy?
About 22 months.
Oh, almost 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a good time to get acquainted with the environment.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay. And there's another question from the email, and this question comes from West Aurora High School in Illinois. And it's, how did you feel when you were in combat? Did you feel you would never return home, and those kind of anxieties?
I wouldn't say that I was in combat. I was in combat, yes, but my work was sort of away from the action. I wasn't on a battlefield where we were shooting one to the other. So I didn't have the experience I think that you're asking for, but we were in an area where at any time an airplane could come over and drop bombs on you. It could happen. And it was rather scary. For example, at one point, I was in an area close enough where they could shoot ammunition over into the area where we lived. It didn't, nobody got hurt in my organization, but it was possible.
Okay. All right. And I think I saw another hand up out at our audience that is connected. Do you have any last questions before we draw a conclusion to our series today?
How many Tuskegee Airmen are still living?
That question always comes up.
Good question.
Well, we really don't know. As I mentioned earlier, I've seen figures as high as 19,000 total. I'm sure that that's much lesser now. A couple of years ago, we had a convention, and there were some 350 original Tuskegee Airmen there. We don't have a real count of the number that we have left, but we do know that they're dwindling every day. And the last figure that I saw, the estimate, was just under 200 alive. I'm glad that I'm one of those who's still here. But we don't have an accurate number. But it won't take long before all of us will be gone.
Okay, so we went from approximately 19,000, right, and now today we're down to a little over 200.
That's right.
So this is why, again, we are very honored and appreciative to be able to talk with you today, such a distinguished man of yourself. Sure. And just again, thank you for your contributions.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Any last questions?
How many planes were there estimated?
How many planes were there? And I'm assuming that he's referring to the P-51 because that's the plane that is most often spoke about. How many planes estimated participated in the Tuskegee Airmen's group?
Well, we had a squadron of about 24, 26 aircraft. We had, so during the course of the war, they, I can give you some figures as to how many were lost. But as far as the total number, it's hard to say. But it might be interesting to know, though, that out of our service, that we had 66 pilots were killed in action, and 32 were forced down and taken as prisoners of war. But we had a pretty good number that survived. I don't have a figure, and I should have, of the number of lost, actually lost in World War II, but I don't have that at my tongue.
Okay, and just to bridge an understanding to the students, you mentioned squadron, so different groups or squadrons came together and formed the larger whole of the Tuskegee.
That's right. You see, we had, okay, let's say we had approximately 6 squadrons in the group that I was in. And each one would have something like 150 to 200 men. So there were, as I said, approximately up to maybe 19,000 total, and it's dwindled down to just a matter of a few hundred now. So.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to take some of the last questions from the email, and this is coming from Sullivan, and the question is, he's noticing that you have a lot of adornments on your lapel and wanted to know what some of those credentials were. If you could just tell us a little bit about some of them.
Well, these, the ones that go like this, are pins. They had nothing to do with my duty time. Okay. These are pins that, like where I've spoken, and somebody give me a pin. Now the others here, these are awards for my military service, and they have, like, for good conduct, and I do have 2 meritorious service medals, and just a few of those for doing good work or something like that.
All right, and the red jacket, would you like to explain to the students? Because it's very distinguished. I'm sure they may wonder why I don't have a red jacket.
Yes, there is a reason for the red jacket. Okay. Now, I said we have some 54 or 55 chapters throughout the states. And each chapter can do their own, choose their own jackets. Now we have some have blue jackets, some have a black jacket, different. Ours is red for a significant reason. We elected, our chapter elected to carry on the legacy, and by using the red jacket to identify the Tuskegee Airmen. Now, during the course of the war, our chapter, our organization, the Tuskegee Airmen, became famous for their accomplishment for shooting down airplanes. And our pilots decided they wanted to let everybody know who they were, because the bomber pilots didn't know that they were being escorted by black pilots. And there was a scene in the movie, for example, where some pilots had been brought home from a mission, and he went looking to find who it was that escorted them. And they didn't want to believe it when they got to the organization. They didn't want to believe that there were black pilots that were escorting them. And after that, when they found out, then they started asking for the red jackets, because the guys got the brightest red paint they could find, painted the tail assemblies red. And the Germans called them Schwarzvogelmenschen, black birdmen. The Americans called them red-tailed angels, because they were bringing home with fewer casualties. So we elected to use the red jacket in respect for the red tails of the 332nd Fighter Group.
Okay, a great reason to have it red.
Right.
All right. So I want to thank our audience. Thank you, Meek Elementary School students, for joining us today. Thank our virtual audience for tuning in to the DLN channel. Hope that you will be able to visit us again next week on Tuesday, when we continue to fly through African American history with the Tuskegee Airmen, where we will have our honored guest, Sergeant Harry Quinton. So again, I want to thank you, Chief Master Sergeant Williams, and goodbye.